Donald Trump has dominated headlines and media coverage since he announced his U.S. presidential candidacy last June. Out of an original field of 17 Republican candidates, he's the last one standing, making him the presumptive nominee for the party. The coverage of his campaign has led some critics to accuse the media of creating the Trump phenomenon. But as CCTV's Jim Spellman reports, it's not that simple.
We're a little nervous.
The race for U.S. president began with about 20 candidates. But the American media has given far more attention to Donald Trump than any of the others. Media analytics company MediaQuant tracks mentions of candidates on TV, in print, and online. They then use advertising rates to calculate how much all that coverage would be worth if campaigns were paying for it as advertising. Trump blows away the rest of the field with nearly $3 billion worth of coverage over the last year, followed by Hillary Clinton at $1.1 billion and Ted Cruz at almost $800 million.
I won.
Trump leveraged this coverage masterfully, using it to help knock out his opponents and become the presumptive Republican nominee for president.
The numbers we're seeing for Trump are 4 times the 2008 numbers and double what Romney and Obama were generating back in 2012.
You know, I've never done it. For 7 months I've been a politician.
So has the U.S. media given Trump a free ride? Well, it's not that simple. Much of the coverage has been negative. Trump has marveled at how his critics have struggled to land a blow.
Where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Controversial comments have been widely covered, misstatements have been fact-checked, even his flirtations with conspiracy theories have all been reported on. But many Republican primary voters have consistently supported him.
The old adage that any coverage is good coverage, and to a certain extent it does play out pretty well here. And it's very subjective. Some people might refer to Trump as a narcissist in the media, but some of his backers would actually consider that a key attribute of a leader in a political role like President of the United States.
In the political trade, the kind of coverage Trump gets is called earned media, and Trump certainly works hard earning it. Trump is a presence on social media. When other candidates refuse to give interviews or hold news conferences, Trump makes himself available while using the skills he has honed over years in the public eye.
You're all fired.
I think the reality television experience has given him the ability to not only understand what motivates people emotionally, what rings their bell, he also has picked up the acting chops to, sort of telegraph himself as a true believer.
And Trump plays into a U.S. media that needs the ratings, readers, and revenue just as much as Trump needs them.
A for-profit media environment is driven by ratings, driven by ad impressions, driven by the economics that they face in this information environment.
The big ratings Trump brings means big profits, and that's a deal that may be too good for the U.S. media to pass up. Jim Spellman, CCTV, Washington.
Joining us now from Los Angeles, Cenk Uygur is host of The Young Turks, which bills itself as the largest online news show in the world. From Texas, Vincent Harris is a conservative media strategist who's developed digital strategies with Senators Rand Paul and Ted Cruz, among others. And also from California, Pamela Rutledge is a media psychologist and director of the Media Psychology Research Center. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Cenk, let me start with you. Right at the beginning of the show there, we heard President Obama joking about the fact, saying the press could be rightly proud of themselves for the role they played in the Trump candidacy. Maybe a joke, but seriously, how big a role did the media play in making Trump the nominee?
As some candidates in this race would say, huge. They played a gigantic role in it. They gave him about $2 billion in free media. And so I think that people underestimate, that are knee-deep in politics, how much name recognition makes a difference. So you have Donald Trump, who's a reality show star, and so he's been on TV forever, and even before that, he was a media star. So people go in and they see his name and they press that button. So the attention, whether it's positive or negative, is not nearly as important as the fact that it exists. So now, on the other hand, Bernie Sanders had almost no name recognition, and the media pretty much ignored him, and if they covered him at all, it was with great disdain. And he rose up past that anyway, which is an amazing feat. So there are two factors here. One is the media, but also a rising tide of populism that is helping both Trump and Sanders.
Right, and Pamela, if we look at the influence of, let's say, cable news television, we know that from figures that the people who watch cable news television are well into their 60s. So are we perhaps in some way overestimating the impact that cable news has on politics in this country?
Well, we may be overestimating the impact of cable news. You know, a few years ago, some research I did showed that the millennials were getting most of their political commentary from the Comedy Channel, which tells you something about their point of view about politics, and possibly appropriately for this election. But the other thing that happens is that psychologically, when people are familiar with something, it increases their liking no matter what the kind of content. So psychologically, there's this huge benefit, as we were just talking about, of this kind of familiarity. In a world of social media, the news are getting their leads from the populace as much as the populace are getting their lead from the media.
Right, Vincent, you know, we hear a lot of, I guess, misinformation about the role the media played. I was looking at an article that was written in the Washington Post, written by one of their political correspondents, Chris Cillizza, and he says one of the most frequent complaints I hear is, when people find out that he's a political reporter, is that the media doesn't fact-check Donald Trump. And he says that's not true. In fact, Donald Trump has been fact-checked more than anybody else. So is there a bit of misinformation here, perhaps a misperception of what the media is doing?
Yeah, and I would certainly agree with Chris's comments, but let me go back to what was mentioned earlier. Republican primary voters don't just go in and check boxes. Donald Trump won this Republican primary because of the issues that he ran on, and Donald Trump won this Republican primary because he was the candidate that was speaking most to the grassroots Republican base. Now, he managed to generate $2 or $3 billion in free press attention because of his controversial statements and because of his celebrity. But it's not just the traditional media that Donald Trump has been owning. It's social media. With 8 million followers on Twitter, Donald Trump has a larger following on Twitter than almost every cable news show in the country. So he's certainly been fact-checked. If you look at the debate a few debates ago with Marco Rubio, where Marco Rubio was attacking him about Trump University, there was rounds and rounds of media attention on what happened with Trump University. There's been rounds and rounds of media attention on his controversial comments about Muslims. There's been rounds and rounds about his comments about the border. So I think it's unfair to say that Donald Trump hasn't been drugged through the ringer by the media. He just does a great job, as he says in his book, The Art of the Deal, of talking in truthful hyperbole. That's exactly what he's been doing this entire campaign, which is as soon as another candidate seems to be getting attention, he just says something controversial and all of a sudden gets the media attention back onto him.
Right, he's done that very skillfully.
Can I jump in and
Jen,
agree and disagree here? So, first of all, I actually talked to Senator Rand Paul, who I think used to work for Vincent, and he had a great line. He said, Donald Trump does truth-telling without the truth. So it sounds like it's truth-telling because he's not talking like a regular politician and he's not studied and polished like Marco Rubio, so it has the veneer of truth without actually being true. And so I don't want to discount what you're saying. I think there's a lot of truth in what you're saying in terms of his message. This populist message is working, and it's actually disproving what the conservative establishment is saying in America for all this time. They say the Republican voters want free trade deals. No, they don't. That they're in support of the big banks and the rich. No, they're not. And so here's Donald Trump ripping all that apart and actually running a populist campaign. And yeah, of course it's working, right? And that's because he's not beholden to the donors. The Republican establishment fed you all those lies for all those years because they work for their donors. So when you got a guy who's detached from the donors, it turns out he does really well. Again, same for Sanders. But don't discount how much that free media helps him, because people are not paying attention to the nitty-gritty. They don't know anything about his tax proposals or what he's going to do with Social Security. And when others criticize him for attacking Muslims or Mexicans, honestly, a lot of Republican voters look at that and go, yeah, that's my kind of truth-telling.
Okay, Pamela, go ahead.
Right, let me jump in too and add that this is not an election about facts. This is an election 100% about emotion, and he's speaking to the fear that people have about being left behind. So no matter who wins this election, there's going to be a huge population of people out there that feel disenfranchised by current policy, by the way the country's going, and they're not going away. So we haven't been talking about that, and we need to figure that part out.
Right, Vincent, now getting back to your earlier point that Donald Trump addresses those issues that resonate with grassroots voters, the question is, does the media ask the right kinds of questions of a person like Donald Trump? And more importantly, do they demand answers from him?
So I do think that the media is asking a lot of those questions, and I think that his Republican opponents ask a lot of those questions in the debates. I worked for Senator Rand Paul for 20 months or so, and he asked a lot of those questions of Donald Trump. Previously to working for Senator Paul, I worked for Senator Cruz for 3 years. I know Ted Cruz has asked a lot of those questions. So those questions have been asked in debates. And I think the media continue to ask a lot of the questions to Donald Trump about where he used to be on positions compared to where he is today. Those questions were also asked in hundreds of millions of dollars in paid advertising that were run in these past primary states against Donald Trump. And guess what? His earned media and his controversial statements certainly overcame all of the paid media against him, because as a grassroots conservative myself, I can tell you, you can spend as much money as you want on somebody, but if we think that they're authentic, if we think that they're telling us the truth, then we believe them. And that's something that Donald Trump has done a wonderful job of. And using social media, he's also gone around a lot of traditional media conversations and talked directly to voters, whether it's on Twitter or on Facebook, where he has millions of people too. Now look, I worked for Rand Paul. I worked for Ted Cruz. I didn't want Donald Trump to be our nominee. Now he's our nominee, and certainly the media has done a wonderful job of making him the nominee, where we could barely get any attention for most of what Senator Paul was saying. Again, every time some other candidate tried to say something, Donald Trump would just say something incredibly controversial. But let's not say that Republican primary voters aren't still looking at the issues. They picked Donald Trump because they felt he was strongest on border security, and they picked him because they felt like he would keep our country safe. And they picked him because they felt like he would actually shake up Washington.
Cenk, if the media had done its job, then we would have answers to such things as what Donald Trump would do about Social Security, what he would do about immigration, what he would do about ISIS, what he would do about Russia. Do we have those answers?
No, we don't. But really, I do a lot of media criticism, and I think the media is, their bias is mainly pro-establishment. And so that works against candidates like Bernie Sanders, for example. But in the case of Donald Trump, I actually think that they did ask him a lot of questions, but he just wouldn't answer them. And the Republican voters didn't mind that he didn't answer them. He would constantly switch his positions, give enormously vague answers. I mean, his favorite answer is, everybody else is a mess. They're not winning anymore, and I'm going to win, and I'm going to do many, many great things. I mean, what are you going to do with an answer like that? They did follow-up after follow-up, but he refused to give an answer, and Republican voters were like, fantastic, here's a guy who talks like me and hates the same kind of people I hate. And by the way, but Vincent is right, and Dr. Rutledge is right, we feel isolated and we feel scared about our economic situation, and here's a guy who touts himself as a successful businessman, and maybe he'll fix that. Maybe he's our last hope. So I understand that. But I should add, by the way, if the media really wanted to press Trump, for them to keep pointing out that he doesn't like these groups only helped him. It didn't hurt him with Republican voters. What they should have pressed on was what a failure he is as a businessman. He went bankrupt 4 different times. That's what they didn't ask enough about.
Pamela, how did this bias, as Cenk put it, for the establishment help the establishment candidates like Hillary Clinton and work against candidates like Bernie Sanders?
Well, it makes the media emphasize certain stories, but I think the media really responds, as the other folks have been saying, to what gets attention, because that's really the business model, and you can argue for or against that business model, and the other option is you let somebody else pick all the stuff you're supposed to see. But it is about what people care about. So fundamentally, this is reflecting what people want to hear. And as you say, Donald Trump doesn't have to give answers, because people want to know that somebody's going to protect them. That's what they care about. When you're afraid, you don't make good decisions. You don't care about the facts. You just want somebody to say, I got your back.
If you like what you just saw, follow us on social media and visit our website, cctv-america.com.